Welcome on the Cosmic Atom. Have you ever encountered someone whose presence made you uneasy? They said the proper things, smiled at the appropriate times, and never raised their voices. You cannot describe it. There was no evident crime and no obvious cause to suspect them. Nonetheless, your body tightened. Your instincts said what your intellect could not yet understand. This is not as it looks. Carl Jung once remarked that what we refuse to address inside ourselves will be confronted outside by destiny. And more often than not, the individuals who bother us the most aren't those who act poorly. It's individuals who look immaculate, polished, and fully certain in their goodness. However, underneath the compassion, there's a gap, a denial, and occasionally a darkness. This film does not depict evil in the manner we are trained to perceive it. It is the hidden forces inside a person's mind that make them dangerous, not their behavior, but their refusal to look within. Projection, persona, inflation, possession, repetition. These aren't abstract theories. They're lived realities that materialize as off-putting talks and soul-draining relationships. People who reflect everything are unable to bear in themselves onto you. Perhaps more significantly, this is about more than just them. This is about us. Because everyone carries a shadow, and the distinction between safety and danger, completeness and destruction, does not exist amongst individuals. It exists inside all of us. So keep with it, not just to defend oneself from others, but also to see what is hidden in your own mirror. If you can feel the truth stirring inside you, you've come to the correct spot. Subscribe to get more Union insights. And now let us begin. Have you ever sat across from someone and sensed something was amiss without understanding why they were smiling? Their remarks may seem kind, even generous, yet something inside you recoils. A shiver runs down your spine. Your body tightens, and your instincts whisper, something is not right here. Carl Jung paid close attention to such instances during his decades of therapeutic practice. He discovered that what bothers us the most is not what individuals say or do directly. It's what lurks underneath. According to Jung, the most dangerous aspects of human interactions are often caused by something much more subtle than outright animosity. A secret cyclic logical signal that bypasses the intellect and directly affects the neurological system. Unlike evident aggressiveness or clear manipulation, this threat escapes the attention of reason. It's veiled in charm. It may even dress up in a nice outfit. However, the unconscious mind, the deeper, older portion of our psyche, detects when anything is wrong. It does not need proof. It does not need explanation. Jung described this occurrence as a break in psychic congruence. You're seeing a mismatch between what someone seems to be and who they really are. And although the conscious mind may not notice it immediately, the body always does. This incongruence indicates danger, not because the individual is bad, but because they are completely separated from their inner reality. And when veiled, that gap may be considerably more harmful than deliberate malice. Ancient traditions also cautioned against this. They talked of people who had mastered outward appearances but had lost touch with their true selves. In Buddhism, the polished mirror reflects only illusion. In Christianity, whitewashed tombs seem lovely on the outside, but are empty on the inside. These analogies refer to the same phenomena that Jung articulated in contemporary psychology. The risk of someone who has buried their truth so deeply that even they can't locate it. What makes this so problematic is that we are biologically predisposed to believe appearances. We check faces, assess body language, and depend on surface signs to establish safety. However, when a person's outside appearance becomes so flawless that it conceals even themselves, they may control not via purpose, but by existence. They become a walking paradox, a presence that provides comfort on the surface, but causes instinctual retreat on the inside. You feel these tiny emotions are significant when your soul detects a crack behind the smile, a hollowness in the words, or a contrived quality in their compassion. Pay attention. He said that the most dangerous individuals are those who cover their shortcomings so effectively without even realizing it. They withdraw into their own disguise, not because they are wicked, but because they have become strangers to themselves and so unknown to you. Imagine having a chat with someone who seems entirely normal, even warm, but you gradually discover something weird. They begin to assign to you ideas that you have never uttered. They raise strange questions about your motivations. They accuse you of harboring objectives you are aware you do not have. It's as if they're not speaking to you at all, but to an imaginary version of you. Carl Jung identified this disturbing relationship and coined a term that has become one of psychology's most potent notions. The shadow is projected. Jung defined the shadow as all of the aspects of ourselves that we find unpleasant, embarrassing, or scary. These characteristics, such as wrath, jealousy, greed, cruelty, or even repressed creativity, are pushed into the unconscious because they are incompatible with the image we wish to project to the world. However, what is rejected does not vanish. It festers and becomes stronger in the darkness of the soul. When it gets too difficult to contain inside, it seeks release by projecting itself onto others. The individual who falsely accuses you is not always lying. They are not faking malice. They honestly see you as representing something unpleasant, because at some basic level, they cannot accept the notion that it exists inside themselves. You have unintentionally become a screen on which they project their disowned portions. You are no longer regarded as who you are, but as who others fear you will become. This is not only a personal problem. Shadow projection has changed societies, fueled conflict, and ruined relationships. It is what drives moral panic, discrimination, and scapegoating. It is why whole groups have been stigmatized throughout history by society, just as an individual might reject own darkness and search for someone else to bear it. Jung noted that the danger of projection lies not only in the delusion, but also in the belief. The person who projects is certain that they are correct. They don't examine their view, since it seems really authentic. In fact, they will often get validation from others who are attracted into their tale, unaware that they are being presented a false mirror. Jung's insights are supported by modern neuroscience. In the case of shadow projection, our brains are programmed to seek reinforcement of our existing beliefs. This inclination becomes unhealthy. The individual develops a narrative, interprets all information through that lens, and becomes more persuaded that the tale is real. They cease reacting to you as a person and instead act on their internal idea of who you are. This may have serious consequences, particularly in intimate relationships where projection is common. You start to doubt yourself. You may experience confusion, defense, life, or even remorse over something that does not belong to you. And if the project has emotional, social, or professional clout, it becomes much more difficult to separate your reality from theirs. So, how do you know when this is happening? It usually starts with a mild sensation of misalignment. You feel misunderstood, as if your objectives have been perverted. You may face accusations that contradict your sense of self. And no matter how precisely you attempt to explain, your words seem to bounce off a wall. The individual does not hear you. They do not desire clarity. They seek confirmation of their own story. This is the deeper risk. People who cast their shadows don't only misinterpret others. They modify reality to protect their identities. They perceive the world as it must be in order to maintain their self-image. Anyone who disturbs that illusion, even unintentionally, becomes a target. Jung saw this not as moral failing, but as psychological blindness. A person who is unable to confront their own darkness will surely look for it elsewhere. And while projection gives momentary respite, it develops a habitual tone that harms not just relationships, but also the project's own ability for progress. They will never look within to conduct the true mending if they feel the issue is outside of themselves. Recognizing shadow projection is more than simply a safeguard against other websites. Also a call to examine ourselves, since we too are susceptible of projecting. We, too, reject aspects of ourselves that we find undesirable, and we sometimes see in others what we dread or loathe in ourselves. The task starts with awareness. When you're tempted to judge someone, ask yourself, is this about them, or is it about something inside myself that I am hesitant to confront? The more honest we are with our own shadows, the less influence they have over our life. There's a kind of person that exudes assurance. They speak of truth with strong moral conviction, without any uncertainty about virtue as something they have and others lack. On the surface, such people may look inspirational, even spiritually advanced. However, underneath this veneer of moral clarity, Carl Jung offered a dire warning. One of the most damaging psychological processes of ego inflate is often concealed, unlike conventional arrogance, which is easily seen and discarded. Ego inflating is far more difficult to identify since it disguises itself as virtue. Jung described this as a sort of psychological inflation. When a person's ego gets entwined with an archetype such as the savior, prophet, judge, or bearer of perfect truth, the individual no longer views themselves as just human, but as a conduit for something bigger, divine, or infallible. It may seem great at first, but therein lays the risk. When a person feels they are speaking from cosmic authority rather than personal opinion, they lose the ability to question themselves. They no longer wonder, could I be wrong? Instead, they see every challenge to their statements as a challenge to truth itself. Those who disagree are not just incorrect. They are wicked, misguided, or sleepy. This kind of psychological possession leads to moral absolutism. The bloated ego does not allow for contradictions or complexities. It thinks in terms of binary, light versus dark, good versus evil, awakened against lost. This dualistic worldview fosters separation and a subtle sort of violence, not physical but intellectual. It delegitimized the humanity of others in the name of righteousness. Jung found that people in this condition often obtain substantial influence. Their certainty appeals to individuals looking for solutions in a chaotic environment. They provide clarity where there is confusion and direction where there is uncertainty. However, this clarity is an illusion that masks a deep dissociation with their own darkness. Throughout history, inflated egos have led uprisings, founded cults, and developed philosophies that promised deliverance but brought misery. Their strength stems from their unshakable self-belief. And although this commitment may look admirable, it is often based on fear. Fear of unpredictability, frailty, and the commonplace. The ego is unable to accept its limits. Therefore, it flees into grandiosity. Spiritual traditions from several civilizations have warned of this subtle peril. It is known as Zen illness, the illusion that one has attained enlightenment while the ego remains unquestioned. Sufi mystics talk about the veil of light, which is more deadly than the veil of darkness since it is more harder to perceive. The German mystic Meister Eckhart described it as the most deadly snare on the spiritual journey. The indicators of ego inflating are obvious. Once you know where to look, the individual will not accept criticism. Any dissent seems like sacrilege. They demonstrate rigidity of mind, an unwillingness to consider complexity, and an obsessive need to be seen as morally superior. Even that humility may be performative, a tactic to promote their identification as spiritually mature. Nevertheless, maybe the most problematic aspect is that they trust in their own goodness. They do not purposefully deceive people. They're deceiving themselves. Their connection with the archetype is so strong that they really believe they're doing the correct thing. But their honesty makes them more seductive and deadly. Clinically, this is referred to as unconscious inflation. The ego has pushed itself far beyond its natural limits, unable to distinguish between the personal and the transpersonal. It has blended with the holy image and claimed power on its own. Jung observed that when this occurs, the mind becomes unstable. Reality will eventually force a collapse because no person can withstand the weight of being God for very long. The higher the inflation, the more severe the decline. When the inflated identity starts to crumble, the individual often suffers melancholy, bewilderment, or psychotic episodes. This isn't punishment. It is the natural balance of a mentality that has been too near to the sun. So, what should we do if we face such people? First, we must fight the urge to believe their assurance. Jung urged extreme care around persons who profess to have definitive solutions. True knowledge, he argued, is characterized by humility, the capacity to sit with uncertainty and accept. More significantly, we must analyze our own need for a savior. The more we worship individuals who seem to be ethically perfect, the more we ignore our own complexity. The more we seek assurance from others, the less we believe in our own ability to confront it. Finally, Jung tells us that the route to completeness is about being authentic rather than flawless. The genuinely integrated individual does not need to demonstrate their virtues. They bear it softly in their willingness to accept their own shadow and refuse to elevate themselves above others. A particular kind of individual always knows what to say. The motions are intelligent, the expressions are well-timed, and the presence is peaceful and attractive. In social circumstances, they seem perfect, never impolite, awkward, or cruel. And yet, after spending time with them, you leave feeling empty or worse, anxious. The interaction seemed incomplete, as if something important had been overlooked. Carl Jung named this phenomena. Total connection with the persona psychological disguise is so well-crafted and polished that the person behind it is almost gone in human terms. The persona is our social self, the part of us that conforms to expectations by saying the correct things and playing the proper roles. It is not always bad. In fact, we need it to operate in society. However, when we confuse the persona with the self, when we become the role we play, we lose authenticity and something subtle but profound begins to decay within us. This type of person may appear morally upright, emotionally balanced, and even spiritually aware, but beneath their calm lies an eerie stillness, not the stillness of inner peace, but the stillness of suppression. They've learned to control every emotion and instinct to the point that no sign of spontaneity remains. Jung emphasized that such perfection, far from being a virtue, is often indicative of severe psychological suppression. Why is this dangerous? Because humans aren't designed to be perfect. We are intended to be whole. And fullness entails contradiction, conflict, and complexity. When someone has erased any rough edges from their public persona, it is usually because they have hidden their darker sides deep inside. But what is buried does not disappear. It accumulates in the unconscious, generating what Jung referred to as the shadow. And the more work we expend on refining the mask, the more volatile and unpredictable the shadow beneath it. The risk, therefore, is not in civility or professionalism. It is in the disconnection. A person who is completely connected with their identity becomes a mirror, reflecting what others want to see. However, they lose the capacity to feel truly, connect vulnerably, or share anything authentic. They become a walking show, and any engagement with them, no matter how pleasant, seems weirdly empty. When you come into contact with them, you can feel it. It's not what they say, but what is lacking. There is no emotional depth, no unpredictable elements, no feeling of danger or disclosure. That grin may be sincere, but it lacks warmth. The sympathy seems to be rehearsed. Their accord seems more like a surrender than actual harmony. And although many people like them, no one really knows them. Jung saw this as a kind of self-betrayal. The person gives up their essence for acceptance. They conform to society's expectations at the expense of their own selves. This is often perpetuated by childhood experiences in which authenticity was received with censure or punishment, while conformity was praised. Over time, the genuine personality fades, and the persona is the only face they remember. However, as Jung pointed out, the mind cannot sustain such imbalance indefinitely. The suppressed components eventually emerge, sometimes via violent outbursts, illogical conduct, or strange mood swings, and sometimes through anxiety, sadness, or a midlife crisis that demolishes the whole veneer. The higher the perfection, the bigger the disintegration. Furthermore, neurosis. Science has verified Jung's understanding. Mirror neurons in our brains detect minute differences in tone, language, and facial emotions. We can sense when someone is emotionally removed from what they're saying, even if we don't understand why. It manifests as unease, mistrust, or a general sensation that something is odd. So, how can we identify the two identified persona? Look for symptoms of emotional sterility. Does the individual ever acknowledge to making mistakes? Do they convey genuine delight or sorrow? Can they accept vulnerability? Or do they change the topic when the talk becomes too personal? Do they show symptoms of healthy contradiction? Or is what they say so constant as to be rigid? However, your personal response may be the most crucial indication. Pay notice if you feel distant, uncertain of yourself, or empty after an exchange. Your subconscious may be perceiving that the person in front of you is not there. Not because they want to mislead, but because they have forgotten who they are behind the mask. True connection necessitates imperfection. It takes guts to be seen as a flawed and changing human person, rather than a polished image. Jung argued that integration occurs when we let go of the drive to look flawless and begin regaining the aspects of ourselves that we have lost in our search of acceptance. Have you ever gazed into someone's eyes and felt that they were no longer really present? Their body is present and their voice is intact, yet something essential has changed. The tone of their words becomes absolute. Their presence, which was previously multifaceted, now seems wrapped in a single aura that is overwhelming and almost sacrosanct. Carl Jung investigated this phenomena extensively and dubbed it archetypal possession. In human psychology, archetypes are universal patterns of human experience that are preserved in the collective unconscious. They include the hero, the victim, the rescuer, the warrior, the mother, the judge, and many more characters. These forces aren't just symbols. These are very powerful psychic forces. Healthy archetypes bring structure and purpose to our lives. Nevertheless, if a person connects too strongly with one, they risk being possessed by it, losing their uniqueness and human complexity. Archetypal ownership is not a fiction. It's a really genuine psychological condition. When an archetype takes over a person, they begin to behave as if they are playing a part. The intricacy of their inner lives is supplanted with a predetermined story. They're no longer John or Maria. They are the enlightened, martyred, truth-seeking warrior. Everything they say and do is filtered through that lens. This is more than just a theatrical production. It is really risky. Why? Because when someone is possessed by an archetype, they lose their capacity to reflect. They cease questioning their own ideas and emotions. They are no longer able to convey subtlety. They are not in question. Their comments have the weight of certainty, not the type that comes from knowledge, but from psychological rigidity. And this conviction, disguised in spiritual or moral language, has the potential to attract or control others. Jung often noted this phenomena among spiritual leaders, political revolutionaries, and ideological fanatics. However, it does not just affect people in positions of authority. A buddy who always plays the victim, or a partner who is always the rescuer. A colleague who views every circumstance with moral absolutes. Each is an illustration of archetypal ownership on a smaller, but equally powerful scale. You may feel it in the change of energy. Their look becomes fierce, and their tone remains steadfast. Their answer is automated. There is a lack of personal taste. A sense of mechanical certainty takes hold. Jung's colleague, Robert Moore, defined it as connecting with a component of the psyche that has been inflated to mythological dimensions. You're not speaking to the individual. You're speaking with the archetype that has taken over their lives. Spiritual traditions have long acknowledged this danger. Shamanic cultures see a distinction between controlled channeling of archetypal energy and unconscious possession, in which the person gets devoured. Christian mystics discussed spirit discernment, or the capacity to separate heavenly inspiration from psychological distortion in Eastern thinking. The risk is not in confronting mythological powers, but in thinking you are them. Modern neuroscience has even identified analogous effects in situations of archetypal possession. When brain activity in regions connected with personal identity declines, and that related with transpersonal or mythic experiences increases. These moods are transcendent, not just in ritual contexts, but also in everyday life. They often appear as rigidity, obsession, or charisma, unrestrained by self-awareness. The state's persuasive power is what makes it so dangerous. People possessed by archetypes have a sense of destiny. Their confidence is magnetic. They gain adherence not in spite of their conviction, but because of it. In a world full of uncertainty, their black and white perspective offers tempting clarity. But this clarity comes at the expense of truth. Jung cautioned that archetypes had severe polarities. The figure of the rescuer embodies the force of the tyrant. The victim archetype may readily be transformed into that of a manipulator. When someone identifies with an archetype, they may embody both its light and shade, but they only perceive the former. They grow oblivious to their inconsistencies and hence more dangerous. And when the repercussions of acts motivated by exaggerated assurance result in damage, the individual often disputes responsibility. They claim they were just directed to do the correct thing, or stating the truth. Jung reported several examples in which the subject had symptoms of forgetfulness or rationalization, unable to reconcile their actions with their conscious self-image. This is why archetypal possession is so terrible. It is not just hazardous to others. It also represents a severe loss of self. The person no longer exists as a whole human being, but as a receptacle for something beyond their capacity to integrate. The more they stay in that condition, the more difficult it gets to return. So, how do we recognize it? Look for the lack of uncertainty. Notice when a person no longer talks for themselves, but rather from a position of fictitious authority. Consider the rigidity, intensity, and incapacity to respond rather than react. Most importantly, trust your intuition. If you feel like you're talking to a force rather than a person, you probably are. Jung did not recommend that we shun archetypes. In fact, he felt they were crucial for psychological development. However, we must connect to them mindfully. We must understand when they are active in us. We must never mix their voice with our own. To do differently risks losing what makes us human, our ability to reflect. Contradiction and inner freedom. Some folks seem to live in a loop. No matter how many opportunities they're given or how much knowledge they seem to achieve, they always end up in the same spot, deceived, abandoned, and misunderstood. Good again, the personalities and surroundings may vary, but the emotional screenplay stays uncannily consistent. Carl Jung referred to this fatal trend as the desire to repeat, a psychological force that causes us to unknowingly duplicate the traumas we never sought. This is not just poor luck, nor is it self-sabotage in the traditional sense. It is something deeper, the psyche's effort to overcome unresolved trauma via experiencing it. The concept is contradictory. Why would somebody desire for pain? However, Jung, along with other psychoanalysts such as Freud and subsequently Christopher Wallace, recognized that the unconscious does not function logically. It relies on familiarity and suffering. When this occurs, everything we have always known becomes oddly magnetic. We do not recall every hurt with words. Some of our oldest and most serious hurts are held as emotional imprints, unresolved patterns of fear, abandonment, rejection, or neglect. These impressions exist in the body, neurological system, and unconscious. Jung referred to them as complexes, which are bundles of energy charged with integrated emotion and meaning. And while these complexes remain unconscious, they influence our fate more than any intention could. Consider a youngster who has never been accepted as an adult. They may be instinctively attracted to emotionally unavailable relationships, not because they like the agony, but because a part of them is still searching for the love they never had. The mind, in its misdirected genius, attempts to retell the tale with a new conclusion. However, since the wound has never been exposed, the same pattern occurs again. This is the crux of repetitive compulsion. It is not punishment. It's not idiocy. It is the unconscious attempt to settle itself via action rather than thought. However, without conscious knowledge, resolution is unattainable, and the cycle continues. Jung cautioned that these compulsions might be deceptively subtle. We feel we are making new decisions, forming new connections, and pursuing new pathways. However, they all start to look the same. Although the faces vary, the emotional consequence remains constant. Over time, the repetition becomes our identity. We use phrases like, "I always attract the wrong people," or "life is just unfair to me," without comprehending that we are the quiet authors of the exact scripts that ruin us. Modern neurobiology provides solid confirmation. Early trauma creates physiological imprints in the brain. Neural pathways created under stress become the default paths for future perception and action. We read new circumstances not as they are, but through the prism of past pains. This is why two individuals may go into the same environment and have very different emotions. Because their brains have been conditioned by distinct backgrounds, one feels safety while the other senses peril. What makes this so hazardous isn't only the emotional turmoil. People get caught up in repetition. Compulsions enlist people to play parts in their internal drama. Not consciously, but energetically. A person who is formerly defenseless may trigger scenarios in which they are controlled again. A person who has been abandoned may instinctively drive others away in order to experience that rejection again. Jung defined negative synchronicity as the unconscious orchestrating encounters that reflect its unresolved contents. You've probably seen this play out. Someone repeatedly falls for the same kind of partner, domineering, emotionally distant, or explosive. Each time they persist. This one is unique, yet the pattern resurfaces often quicker and more intensely than previously. The tragedy is more than simply the suffering. It is the shock. They believe life has betrayed them once again. They are unable to see that they are victims of their own unconscious past, rather than destiny. Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's colleague, said simply, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So, how can we break the cycle? First, notice the script and ask, what is the emotional outcome that keeps repeating in my life? What part of me is seeking to be heard, healed, or redeemed? These patterns are not random. They are encrypted communications from the past that request to be decrypted in the present. Second, by refusing to play prescribed parts in other people's unconscious dramas. When someone attempts to portray you as the betrayer, savior, persecutor, or victim, stop and consider whether you are reacting to the actual person in front of you or a projection based in their unresolved traumas. Third, and most significantly, by fostering compassion not just for others, but also for ourselves, the desire to repeat is not a weakness. It is a plea for healing. When confronted with knowledge rather than shame, it starts to soften. The tale starts to shift not through force, but by presence. Jung argued that being aware of these patterns was the first step towards freedom. We can't prevent all suffering, but we can stop experiencing it constantly. Finally, we may begin to select a new tale. If all of the dangers mentioned by Carl Jung, such as projection, persona, inflation, possession, and repetition, have one thing in common. They start in portions of ourselves that we cannot see. The unconscious is more than just a collection of suppressed trauma and lost memories. It is a living, shaping force. And until we address it actively, it will control our lives from the shadows. So how can we change? How can we overcome the internal influences that distort perception, sabotage our relationships, and drag us into the same pain again and over? Jung's response was not perfection, moral superiority, or spiritual purity. His response was incorporation of a shadow. According to Jung, the shadow is the sum of everything that we refuse to admit about ourselves. It encompasses not just our urges, wounds, and weaknesses, but also our untapped potential, repressed desires, and forgotten strengths. Most people feel that the shadow represents the bad side, but it is a misconception. The shadow isn't wicked. It is merely invisible. Jung said that what is unseen when left and assimilated becomes hazardous. I would like to be complete rather than excellent. This one line contains the secret to psychological wellness. Being socially acceptable entails conforming and displaying just what is appropriate. To be whole, however, is to fully understand oneself, including what is faulty, humiliating, impetuous, and human. Integration is not about removing the shadow. It's about building a connection with it. A person who has started this process seems considerably different from the inflated, disguised, or possessed. They are not consumed with being correct. They do not safeguard their image at any cost. They are not bothered by contradictions. Instead, they carry themselves with a calm power and honesty that comes not from knowing all the answers, but from facing their own doubts without hesitation. This kind of presence is unusual and distinct. You can sense it when someone recognizes their flaws without being ashamed, when they can express their anxieties without seeking comfort, When someone can sit with your suffering without attempting to alleviate it because they have experienced their own. Jung thought that psychological maturity is the hallmark of an integrated person, not someone who has overcome their shadow, but rather someone who is no longer controlled by it. How does this appear in practice? It starts with extreme self-honesty. What aspect of myself do I most dread seeing? What kinds of individuals bother me the most and why? What allegations do I make against others that may represent an unresolved issue in me? It continues with loving observation when rage erupts. The integrated individual neither suppresses nor indulges in it unintentionally. They inquire, where is this coming from? Instead of passing judgment, they become intrigued about their inner lives. This transformation alone turns the shadow from an adversary to a teacher. In Tibetan Buddhism, this is known as changing poison into medicine, as Jung's alchemical metaphor suggests. It is the arduous but liberating process of transforming our greatest burdens into the basis of knowledge. Even neuroscience supports this route. According to studies, when we reflect on painful emotional experiences, particularly those we had previously dissociated from, we form new neural connections between emotional centers, such as the amygdala and reflective areas, dulling prefrontal cortex integration or rewiring the brain. What had before overwhelmed us becomes intelligible, and what is understood may finally be altered. This does not imply that integrated persons do not have shadows. It indicates that they have a bond with their shadow. They may declare, yes, I have the ability to be cruel. I have a propensity to retreat, control, and avoid. But I see it. I work with it. As a result, it no longer exerts power over me. They don't have to wear perfectionism. They do not reflect their own darkness onto others. They perceive vulnerability in everyone, beginning with themselves. This humility does not imply weakness. It is the source of true power. It enables individuals to interact with the world from a position of clarity rather than uncertainty. It also makes people less reactive, more grounded, and genuinely trustworthy. According to Jungian analyst James Hollis, psychological maturity comes when we renounce the myth of our innocence and cease pretending that everything is okay. We learn to accept life and people as they are. We're no longer surprised by imperfections in others or ourselves. We start to perceive complexity not as a danger, but as a fact. This is the person you immediately feel secure with, not because they are perfect, but because they are genuine. Their existence does not need anything. It does not manipulate. It doesn't hide. It just is. And in their company, you feel compelled to do the same. Shadow integration is not a goal. It is a lifetime process of recovering what has been exiled, offering what has been judged, and illuminating what has been left in the dark. And every step we take toward our own completeness moves us away from being hazardous to ourselves and others, no matter how enlightened or loving we assume we are. How spiritual, how it developed. We all have a shadow. Jung thought that the truth was not a curse. It is a mirror, and how we react to the mirror decides everything. The most dangerous individuals are those who deny having darkness, those who project it upon others, those who wear masks of perfection, who speak in the name of ultimate truth, repeating their wounds without contemplation or error. Possession of purpose. They are not monsters. They are human. They were cut off from aspects of themselves that they were unable to confront. However, we are not impotent in the face of that peril. We may choose a different road, one of honesty, of unpleasant contemplation, of standing in front of the mirror and declaring, "This is me." When we accept our own complexity, we become safer not just for others, but also for ourselves. We break the cycle. We become entire. In doing so, we silently provide others permission to do the same. You don't need to be flawless. You only need to be ready to examine whether this message sparked anything in you. If you see patterns in yourself as well as others, you're already doing the job. And that means more than you realize. If this impacted your heart, please leave a remark below. Please let us know which portion remained with you. Share this video with someone who may be caught up in a cycle they are unaware of. In case you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss out on future thoughts from the deeper union path, since change starts with the courage to confront the dark. Dear viewers, your support through Super Chat and membership is the only source of income that keeps this channel running. If you want me to continue uploading valuable content without delays and to stay motivated in providing you with the best wisdom, I need your help. Every contribution, big or small, makes a huge difference. Feel free to donate and support Pure Wisdom so we can keep growing together. Your generosity keeps this journey alive. If you're enjoying the content on Pure Wisdom and find value in the messages we share, I encourage you to subscribe. Based on the latest analytics, 93.9% of viewers are watching without subscribing. By subscribing, you not only stay updated with new content, but also support the channel's growth, allowing us to continue spreading wisdom for the chosen ones. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an important message. Let's build this community together.